Good morning. This is history for Tuesday, April 7, year 2020. And our lesson titled today is World War II, Part 1, which is going to cover September 3rd, 1939 to September 15 of 1940. So, World War II. There is so much to World War II that I hardly know where to begin. It was, after all, the biggest, the costliest, and perhaps the ugliest war that man has ever seen. Involving more than 50 countries on several fronts, World War II took the lives of somewhere between 50 and 70 million people. Most of those were civilians, not soldiers. To help our minds and hearts embrace this enormous conflict, I have broken it down into 4 lessons. In today's lesson, we will just get started with some background to World War II, the invasion of Poland, the Blitzkrieg of Europe, and the Battle of Britain, a fight in the sky. As was true of our World War I lessons, I am able to cover only the most significant battles and events of this global struggle. So, some background to World War II. You already know the outcome of World War I. The Treaty of Versailles left the Germans with an outrageous debt to pay and a great deal of humiliation. When Adolf Hitler was a young corporal and learned that the Germans had signed an armistice to end the Great War, he buried his head in his hands and wept. He wasn't the only German to feel that way, to be broken-hearted after World War I. In the case of Germany's loss, you could say that time did not heal. Hitler, as he rose to become the Führer, promised the German people that he would restore Germany to its former glory and that he would expand it. He sincerely believed and fiercely promoted the idea that Germany needed more Lebensraum, or living space, for the prosperity of the Aryan race. Hitler quickly set his eyes toward his original homeland for his living space. Do you remember the homeland? It was Austria-Hungary. Desiring the unification of Austria and Germany as far back as his teenage years, Hitler forced Austria to become part of Germany in 1938. After Hitler demanded the resignation of Austria's leader, German troops rolled right into Austria as if they owned it. The bloodless takeover was called the Anschluss, which means to join. Like it or not, Austria joined the Third Reich. Needless to say, the Anschluss of Austria was concerning to other Europeans, but not concerning enough to start a war. Hitler took advantage of his success and marched next to take a slice of Czechoslovakia, called the Sudetenland. Since Sudetenland was home to 3 million German-speaking people, Hitler justified his desire for it as providing protection for his people. Now, Neville Chamberlain, the British Prime Minister, fell for Hitler's good guy routine as the caring landlord of the Sudetenland. A few others fell for it too. When Hitler famously said, "This is the last territorial demand I have to make in Europe," Chamberlain believed him. Chamberlain and other nations negotiated with Hitler at a historic meeting in Munich, Germany, and signed the Munich Pact in 1938, which essentially gave Hitler permission to take the Sudetenland. Also signing the pact were Edouard Daladier, the Premier of France, and Benito Mussolini, the dictator of Italy. Though the leaders of Czechoslovakia were not invited to the 13-hour meeting about their own future, the Munich Pact allowed the peaceful Nazi takeover of parts of their nation. The reality of the situation was that the Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia gave Hitler more than living space. It also gave him important resources like gold and coal and immeasurable confidence. Chamberlain would later regret his friendly talks of appeasement with Hitler, and the world would later call Chamberlain a fool for having negotiated with a despot. Neville Chamberlain and many others were naive about all that Hitler was capable of. Just 6 months after signing the Munich Pact, Hitler demanded more. Dictators aren't easily satisfied, are they? He set his sights on the rest of Czechoslovakia and forced the president to surrender it to him. Hitler must have been persuasive and very intimidating because, just like Austria-Hungary, Czechoslovakia caved in. Without bloodshed, German troops rolled into Czechoslovakia and the country was no more. The United States, like Great Britain, chose not to react strongly to Hitler's blatant violation of the Treaty of Versailles, which put all kinds of restrictions on Germany. No one except Hitler wanted another war. The invasion of Poland. Well, like a playground bully who has easily gotten his way, Adolf Hitler looked next to invade Poland. This time, he wasn't quite as sentimental about it, as if he were there only to protect German-speaking people. No, with the invasion of Poland, Hitler made it clear that he despised the Polish people, especially Polish Jews, and wished to destroy their nation for his benefit. In his mind, the Poles stood in the way of his ultimate goal, which was to seize the Soviet Union. In Hitler's eyes, the Soviet Union offered a vast living space to further the Aryan race, and Poland was a land bridge to get there. Hitler pretended to befriend the Soviet Union as he advanced on Poland. He negotiated with Joseph Stalin, whom you already know as the dictator of Russia, to divide Poland between Germany and the USSR. Poor Poland. Sandwiched between two ruthless dictators, the country hardly stood a chance of defending itself, but it tried, rather valiantly. Poland mobilized an army of 1 million to steer off the German invasion that started on September 1st, 1939. Gerda Weizmann, whom we covered in the Holocaust, was 15 at the time. Poland never officially surrendered to Germany, but after 5 weeks of bitter fighting, the Polish army fell into the hands of the Nazis. With the blaring sirens of the Stuka dive bombers and with tanks roaring through the streets, the Third Reich attacked Polish military and innocent civilians alike to swallow up the western half of Poland. More than 5 million Poles were sacrificed for Hitler to obtain more Lebensraum. Gerda Weizmann survived, as you know, but her family did not. Here's a picture of the area that we're talking about. You can see how Germany and the USSR both invaded Poland from each side. Adding to Poland's pain and sorrow, the Russians were tearing into their side of Poland like a lion sinking its teeth into fallen prey. After a swift invasion that started on September 17th, Stalin sentenced 15,000 Polish officers to the gulags. Do you remember gulags? Those were the dreaded work camps in Siberia. In what is now known as the Katyn Massacre, Soviets marched thousands of Polish officers into the Katyn forest, shot them in the back of the head, and pushed them into large, unmarked graves. In time, 22,000 Polish officers were executed by the Soviets. You may be wondering, was this enough to get the attention of the rest of Europe? The answer is yes. Just 2 days after Germany invaded Poland, Great Britain and France declared war on Germany. The date was September 3rd, 1939, and most would say that World War II officially began on this day. After declaring war on Germany, the newly formed allies of Great Britain and France ignored Russia's brutal part in the invasion of Poland for fear of taking on too much too fast. And so Stalin, having gotten away with murder, literally, proceeded to invade the 3 Baltic states of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, as well as Finland. It infuriated Hitler to lose those Baltic states to Stalin. He had hoped to invade them himself. Let's talk about the Blitzkrieg of Europe. After Russia invaded Finland, the world held its breath for a few months, hoping that maybe, just maybe, the war in Europe wouldn't escalate. This standstill has been nicknamed the Phony War because, except for a few submarine attacks, neither side provoked the other side. The sides at this early point of the war in 1939 were the Axis powers of Germany, Italy, and the Soviet Union against the Allied powers, which were Great Britain and France. Unfortunately, the standstill phony war was short-lived. Come April of 1940, the Nazis advanced quite aggressively against Denmark and Norway. The Germans took Denmark in a day, and within weeks placed a puppet government over Norway. Then, starting on May 10th, the Germans flexed their muscles in a rather showy way by taking Luxembourg in just a few hours, the Netherlands, home to Anne Frank, in just 4 days, Belgium in 18 days, and northern France in about 6 weeks. Southern France, also called Vichy France, remained unoccupied and a free zone until 1942, when it too finally fell to the Nazis. The swift takeover of northern France was particularly significant and clearly punitive in nature. Punitive in nature, we say, because punitive means deliberately doing something that inflicts punishment. Hitler did just that when he insisted that the French sign a treaty of surrender in the same railroad car, in the same location where Germany was forced to sign an armistice to end World War I. Hitler had the railroad car specifically delivered for this to work out. Hitler couldn't have been more delighted than to humiliate France in this way. The German people rewarded the Fuhrer back home with a rose petal parade and the waving of swastika flags up and down the streets. Vengeance belonged to the Germans for having endured the harsh stipulations of the Treaty of Versailles. With the capture of northern France, it was evident that this was not the same Germany that sat gridlocked in the trenches of the Western Front in World War I. In fact, rather than resort to long-term warfare, long-term trench warfare, the Nazis used everything they had in World War II, all at the same time, to try to gain a quick upper hand over their enemies. They carried out their strategy using tanks, planes, bombers, paratroopers, heavy artillery, ground troops, and Nebelwerfer, smoke and poison rocket launchers nicknamed Screaming Minis by Allied soldiers for the shrill sound of their incoming mortars. Western journalists used the term Blitzkrieg, meaning lightning war, to try to describe the fast and furious attacks of the Germans. The Germans didn't care for the word Blitzkrieg to define their warfare, but whatever this rapid warfare was called, it worked. The Nazis put most of Europe under their thumb and became allies with Bulgaria, Hungary, and Romania. Remaining neutral in the war were the nations Switzerland, Sweden, and Spain. Spain, as you know, was recovering from a civil war. One last story to tell you about the Blitzkrieg phase of World War II before we move on to the Battle of Britain. The brave execution of Dunkirk. In May of 1940, the Germans, with their armored panzer tanks, had cornered 400,000 Allied troops, mainly French and British, near the fishing village of Dunkirk. France, located just across the English Channel from the Great Britain, without enough rescue boats, the situation appeared fatal. British officials calculated that the Royal Navy could pick up no more than 45,000 men before the Nazis swept in. So there was 400,000 trapped, and the Navy could only pick up 45,000 in their boats. Well, through Winston Churchill, who had just been made Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, word got out that the Allied army was stranded. Churchill, known for his eloquence, made a desperate and moving appeal to his people, saying, among other things, "We shall fight on the beaches, we shall fight on the hills, we shall never surrender." 3 things then happened to turn the deadly situation around. First, the masses in England prayed for a miracle under the leadership of their king, King George VI. Second, Nazi ground troops stalled out for reasons that are still in debate today. Third, hundreds of sailors, fishermen, and yacht owners from Belgium, France, Great Britain, and the Netherlands braved the English Channel in 900 boats of all shapes and sizes to join the Royal Army in rescuing the stranded Allied army. Starting on May 26th, Operation Dynamo, as the rescue was named, took 10 days. Throughout the ordeal, the Germans dropped bombs from overhead, damaging some vessels and demolishing others. At least 8 Royal Navy destroyers were sunk. Men were forced to wade up to their necks for hours in the salty surf, waiting for help to come while bombs tormented them. Little by little and boat by boat, help came. Approximately 338,226 soldiers made it to the shore on the British side of the English Channel, safely out of the hands of the Germans. The British are proud of the Dunkirk evacuation, and to this day, they recreate Operation Dynamo, or the Miracle of Dunkirk, with some of the small fishing boats and private yachts that helped save the day. I wanted to show you the English Channel really quick. You can see on my map, this little body of water is the English Channel. So that's where the rescue happened. All right. The Battle of Britain. A fight in the sky. Since we're talking about the pride of the British, this is the perfect time to tell you about the Battle of Britain, a crucial victory for the British that was fought largely in the sky. The story goes like this. Adolf Hitler believed that if he could subdue Great Britain, he would win World War II. Though the island nation had not been invaded for nearly 900 years, Hitler thought it would be easy to conquer. Hitler's plan, nicknamed Operation Sea Lion, was to assault Great Britain from the sky with the famous Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, and then rush troops in from across the English Channel. The Luftwaffe was led by an overconfident marshal of the Third Reich named Hermann Göring. He was considered a World War I hero for his piloting skills. Goering was a glory seeker. In contrast, the leader of the British Air Force was Hugh Dowding, a cool, calm, calculating individual who was so serious that few enjoyed his company. Many would say that the Battle of Britain played out similar to the personalities of these two men. I would agree. You see, Goering had a rather high and lofty opinion of the Luftwaffe, just as he did of himself. He overestimated the flying abilities of his pilots and thought that within days they could destroy the Royal Air Force. He believed that within weeks he could carve a path for ground troops. But he was quite mistaken. Hugh Dowding, whom I described as calculating, had thought ahead. Realizing that the Germans outnumbered the British 4-1 in aircraft, he immediately ordered the manufacture of more planes, replacing wooden models with metal ones and cranking out Hurricanes and Spitfires in record time. Dowding also saw to the installation of radar towers on the British coast. Radar was something new that the Germans didn't have at this time. Radar gave the British an enormous advantage over the Germans because it allowed them to see the enemy coming. When bombs began to fall over Great Britain, starting in July 10 of 1940, Dowding stayed true to his calm character and did not panic. He allowed the aerial fighting to remain over British turf. He saved fuel, he could salvage downed planes, and he could capture fallen Germans that way. The Germans might have succeeded in taking Great Britain because they were doing a good job of destroying air bases and factories. Their best plane, the Messerschmitt, could fly much higher than the British Spitfire and dive more steeply. But Goering's commanders began to quarrel after several weeks, throwing their leader into a quandary. At the same time, Goering grew nervous about just how well the British were holding up. Since the British weren't going down as easily as expected, Hitler changed the German strategy. Rather than target more docks, more industry, and more air bases, the Luftwaffe attacked large populated cities like London. The Germans assumed that the terror of the bombs would frighten the British into submission. Well, the British were a few steps ahead of the Germans. For one, the British had already evacuated 2 million urban boys and girls to the countryside for protection and stored away their national treasures. 2 rich and poor alike took shelter in the underground subway systems in the large cities during the bombing raids. And 3, a committee of the British government printed millions of posters to rally the British in the event of an attack. Written as a personal message from the king, the poster said, "Your courage, your cheerfulness, your resolution will bring us victory." And "Freedom is in peril, defend it with all your might." And "Keep calm, carry on," which that last one is used in marketing all over today, but it was kept in reserve during the war and few British ever saw it. Now, despite all these measures, the Battle of Britain was terrible, and it was rough on civilians. Some families were never reunited after the tearful evacuation of their children. Tens of thousands died from the bombings, and tens of thousands more were injured. They were injured by falling debris and widespread fire. But the morale of the British could not be broken. The Royal Air Force continued to fight against the Germans, seeing them lose as many as 75 planes in a day. As a matter of fact, the German Heinkel He-111 bomber, which posed as a transport plane, was slowly phased out after the Battle of Britain for its poor performance. Inspiring the British throughout the difficult ordeal was, of course, their Prime Minister, Winston Churchill. In a famous speech, he declared, "The Battle of Britain is about to begin. On this battle depends the survival of Christian civilization. Hitler knows that he will have to break us in this island or lose the war. Let us therefore brace ourselves to our duties, and so bear ourselves that, if the British Empire and its Commonwealth lasts for 1,000 years, men will say, This was their finest hour. In many ways, it was the finest hour for the British. By the end of October, the Germans were forced to abandon the mission, and Operation Sea Lion was canceled. Though air raids, particularly at night, continued over England on and off throughout the war, the British celebrate September 15th as Battle of Britain Day, commemorating especially a decisive British victory over a large-scale Luftwaffe attack on London in 1940. And for us, that's where this lesson ends. Our next lesson picks up with Mussolini's blunders and Hitler's grandiose plans to invade the Soviet Union. And I wanted to show you just a couple pictures in our book here. This is London after one of the raids. You guys get a bonus point if you can tell me what popular kids' books have this in the introduction for the kids' story. And then I wanted to show you a picture of Winston Churchill. And here's some of the airplanes from World War II. And then, if you can see it, there's all those things in the sky are paratroopers. Soldiers using parachutes to go down and fight. All right, that's it. See you tomorrow.